Hey guys, it's Matt Higgins. So in today's video, I want to talk about Sheev Palpatine and some of the most significant moves that he made in order to gain power and eventually take over the galaxy. Alright, so as we know, Palpatine was the apprentice of Darth Plagueis. Now at this time, he was merely a senator of Naboo, and Darth Plagueis had helped Darth Sidious to become a senator on Naboo and increase his political reputation. Meanwhile, Darth Plagueis was teaching Darth Sidious at the time all of the secrets of the Sith, except for the secret to immortal life. Palpatine and Plagueis' relationship continued on until Sheev was elected senator of Naboo. At this point, Sheev had all of the power he wanted and no longer needed his master to help him with his political career. And by this point, Sheev had been taught everything that Darth Plagueis was going to teach him. So to Sidious, there was no sense in being a subordinate to Plagueis at this point, and, as we know, Darth Sidious ended up killing Darth Plagueis in his sleep, thus taking on the role of the Sith Master. At this point, the Sith's master plan was entirely in the hands of Darth Sidious. He was alone in power and had to search for his own apprentice, which we know that he ended up finding and taking Darth Maul as a child. Killing Plagueis and taking on an apprentice was Sidious's first power move that was unassisted, and it was the first one for himself. In this scenario, he bet on himself that he could actually follow through with the Sith master plan, and that he didn't need his master anymore. Next, I want to look at Sidious's relationship building and how he made the right relationships in order to help accelerate him into power and to surround himself with people who would support him. So the first thing that Palpatine did after becoming senator was joining Chancellor Kalpana's ruling party. Chancellor Kalpana is the chancellor who was in power before Chancellor Valorum was, and so Sidious wanted to join the side that had the most power and develop relationships in there to help get him more political influence, essentially. He also looked for people who had potential to become powerful allies, like Wilhuff Tarkin, for example. At this point, Tarkin was still a cadet at the Sullust Sector Spacefarers Academy, but Sidious, or Sheev Palpatine, whatever you prefer, or Senator Palpatine in this case, took interest in him and wanted to have him consider a career in politics. Concurrently, Sidious was also cultivating another relationship that would become very important in the future, and that would be his relationship with Count Dooku. And at this point, Count Dooku was still a Jedi Master and very powerful and respected. But Dooku was also a politician. He had that political mindset that Palpatine wanted for him to lead the opposition against the Galactic Republic. Once Chancellor Valorum had come into power, Sidious made sure to befriend him, and he acknowledged that Chancellor Valorum had pretty much no power, and so he wanted him on his side so he could easily manipulate him while secretly behind his back working to depose him. However, Palpatine's most important relationship was rather unexpected. It would be with a boy from Tatooine, who was picked up by the two Jedi who were sent to negotiate with the Trade Federation, a situation that he himself set up in order to help expose Chancellor Valorum. But let's get back to Palpatine's relationship with Chancellor Valorum. So now we are at the events of The Phantom Menace. As we know, Sidious conspired with the Viceroy of the Trade Federation, Newt Gunray, to blockade Naboo in protest of the Senate's taxation of trade routes in outer star systems. When Queen Amidala finally made it back to Coruscant in order to speak to the Senate, Senator Palpatine at the time persuaded her in order to call for a vote of no confidence, because at that point it had looked like Chancellor Valorum's leadership had failed and showed that he was, in fact, truly powerless. This was all, of course, a ploy by Sidious in order to get himself nominated to become the Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Republic. The failure of Chancellor Valorum's ambassadors to initiate a negotiation was seen by many in the Senate as a massive failure. in conjunction with Queen Amidala's proposal of a vote of no confidence, he was eventually ousted, and an election for a new chancellor was to begin immediately. Of course, it was to no surprise that Sheev Palpatine was one of the people who was nominated to succeed Chancellor Valorum. It wasn't long before Senator Palpatine was elected Supreme Chancellor, as well as when he would first meet Anakin Skywalker. In the years following the events of The Phantom Menace, Chancellor Palpatine watched closely as Anakin trained to become a Jedi. Palpatine was always very complimentary of Anakin, always praising him for his great skill. However, Anakin was much too young to join his side as his apprentice. So to fill that void that Darth Maul had left, Sidious had turned to Dooku, who had now left the Jedi Order at this point. Eventually, he got him to join his side and become Count Dooku, or Darth Tyrannus. Sidious informed Count Dooku of the Sith Master Plan. Together, Sidious and Tyrannus orchestrated the plan in order to plunge the Galactic Republic into its first war in almost 1,000 years, and to finally bring about the end of the Jedi, and in its place, rise of the Sith. Of course, Sidious actually had other plans. His plan was to use Dooku as an effective military leader for the opposition, while cultivating his relationship with Anakin, and eventually having Anakin become his apprentice. Count Dooku's moves, rallying systems to the Separatist cause, had concerned the Galactic Senate. Numerous senators called for a vote in order to create a new army to combat the Separatists. However, this process would be expedited once Obi-Wan Kenobi was captured by Count Dooku and the Separatists. Once it was revealed that the Separatists were building battle droid units, desperate actions had to be taken. Emergency powers were given to the Chancellor under immense support of the other senators. Chancellor Palpatine would immediately use his emergency powers to create a grand army of the Republic to combat the rising power of the Separatists. Alright, so we just covered a lot of things here. We started off well before The Phantom Menace and ended right in the middle of Attack of the Clones. I hope what you guys see is that the overarching theme is this ability to develop relationships. Sidious developed relationships with so many people, allies, foes, everybody, because to him, it was the relationships that he could build that would get him into power. I would go as far to even say that he had no allies. His allies at the time were simply people who he could use in order to gain more power for himself. He was a self-absorbed individual. He actually didn't really care about anybody else but himself. Alright, so let's get back into the timeline here. So right now, we are towards the latter half of Attack of the Clones. The Grand Army of the Republic has been established, and the Clone Wars are about to begin. At the start of the war, Anakin was in a really tough spot. His mother had died, and he broke the Jedi Code by marrying Senator Padme Amidala. The relationship that Anakin had with Chancellor Palpatine at this time was at the point where he felt like he could trust him with some things. He didn't tell him that he was married to Padme, but he did tell him about the Tusken Raiders. This self-disclosure helped to even further strengthen the relationship between Chancellor Palpatine and Anakin. And to Anakin, he felt like Chancellor Palpatine was really the one person he could trust. I mean, he trusted his own master to a point, but he knew that his master was so indoctrinated in the Jedi Code that he couldn't tell him everything. The Clone Wars were, overall, just a massive power grab for Sidious. During this time, regulations were lifted. He got more emergency powers because, at this point, the Senate was so sick and tired of deliberating and inaction that they just felt like it would be better if Sidious had the power, or Chancellor Palpatine, I guess, to them. And meanwhile, he furthered his relationship with Anakin Skywalker and deepened his distrust towards the Jedi Order. I would say the biggest example of this is Ahsoka Tano being framed for bombing the Jedi Temple. Even though Sidious knew the truth, at this point, he was fully committed to persuading everybody that Ahsoka Tano did it, and that she was guilty and should be punished. He did this in the hope that it would continue to further Anakin's distrust of the Jedi Order. In the final days of the war, Chancellor Palpatine was kidnapped by General Grievous, and a battle above Coruscant ensued. As we know, Anakin Skywalker and Master Kenobi were sent to rescue the Chancellor. What resulted was exactly what Sidious wanted. He had Dooku and Anakin right there in front of him, fighting to be his apprentice. Even though Anakin didn't know it at the time, he was being manipulated by Sidious and eventually gave in and killed the Count against the Jedi Code. He trusted Sidious so much as to follow his orders against what the Jedi had told him. Just think about how significant that is. Now, Sidious was all in on Anakin. All his chips were on the table. He was fully committed to getting Anakin to join him. The Chancellor's accumulation of power had concerned the Jedi so much that it forced them to act. Their choice to spy on the Chancellor and use Anakin to do it furthered Anakin's distrust in the Jedi Order and made him really question who was the good guy in this situation. Of course, we know that Chancellor Palpatine appointed Anakin to be his personal representative on the Jedi Council, and that he was not given the rank of Master. Again, this made Anakin question whether he should even trust the Jedi Order. Telling Anakin about Darth Plagueis the Wise brings us full circle. His personal story made Anakin question further whether the Jedi were actually good. Alright, so before we get to the epic climax, let's take another step back. Right now, Sheev Palpatine is making a really serious bet. He's put all of his money on Anakin joining him, and he's working really hard to manipulate him to leave the Jedi and join him. Alright, so now that we acknowledge the gravity of Sheev's situation, let's get back into this. At this point, Sidious makes his boldest move yet. He reveals himself to Anakin. Now mind you, this Sith master plan has been in the works since Darth Bane established the Rule of Two. This has been in action for almost 1,000 years. And Sidious has pinned the entire thing on this one moment. He gives Anakin an ultimatum. Either he saves the Jedi Order, or he saves his wife. Anakin initially decides to turn him over to the Jedi, but you can tell that he's conflicted. Master Windu's decision to not bring him along with the arrest party furthers his distrust towards the Jedi. He heads to the main council chamber to meditate. Either save the Jedi, or save the one he loves. The conflict within him brings him to tears. He decides to head back over to the Chancellor's office. And what does he find? He finds Palpatine on the ground, pinned. Mace Windu's got him. Windows blown out. Mace is ready to strike him down and end this once and for all. Anakin is not quite sold on his decision yet, but it was too late. Mace Windu was ready to strike. He had a mere split second to make this decision, either save the Jedi or save the one he loves. Imagine being in that situation where you have to make such a huge choice in such a small amount of time. That's crazy. And I'll tell you this. You know why Anakin still had good in him? You know how we know? It's because he chose love. He chose love in that split second. Now maybe it wasn't the right decision in the long run, but to him it was choosing love. It was choosing the family that he never had, the family he always longed for. Okay, so that's pretty deep. Let's take another step back. Sidious's bet has paid off. The Sith's plan is moving forward. The Jedi were destroyed. The Galactic Empire would rise. He has the most powerful Jedi, the Chosen One, now a Sith, at his side. Darth Sidious was now the most powerful being in the entire galaxy. To him, it looked like nothing could defeat him. But there was one thing that could. One thing he underestimated. and it was the exact reason why Anakin joined him in the first place. Love. Sure, it was Anakin's love for Padme that made him join Sidious in the first place, but it was Anakin's love for his children that made him come back to the good side, that made him betray Sidious, this man who utilized him for nothing more than his power. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the beauty of Star Wars.